This building is made out of a new and innovative material that some say could revolutionize the way we build. It's wood. Yes, it's part of an emerging trend. Big buildings, sometimes even skyscrapers, are increasingly being built out of wood. And this is partially being made possible because of a new construction method called mass timber, which joins multiple layers of lumber together to create stronger and more fire-resistant building parts. And that allows you to build a taller wood building. Now, you might be wondering, why does that matter? Well, this could be a way to build with fewer carbon emissions with a renewable resource, and a way to mass produce buildings in a factory, which could be a more affordable way to build housing in general. But like any new building technology, a lot of questions and challenges remain around how to actually design with mass timber and make it more widespread. And that ended up being the perfect setup for a competition. Earlier this year, Urbanarium hosted a design competition called Decoding Timber Towers, inviting participants to create designs for 8 to over 20-story high-rise buildings using wood. There were 44 entries from all over the world, with submissions from Brazil, Australia, New Zealand, South Africa, and all over the US and Canada. And for this video, I want to highlight a few of the recurring themes I noticed, because I think they raise some important questions for anyone designing with mass timber. At their core, mass timber buildings are prefabricated buildings. What that means is that most of the building is constructed inside a factory first, and then delivered to the site in parts, rather than building everything at the site itself. So in order to design a mass timber building, you first have to design those parts, the building blocks that fit together to form the final building. Many of the teams in the competition used what's known as a panelized approach, using a mix of columns, panels, and walls that can be packed flat for transportation and then pieced together on site. I think a good example of this is an entry called Timber Town. The team uses mass timber posts to hold up mass timber panels, and then repeats that simple system again and again around a steel core to create a wood high-rise. Another entry called The Ancestral Peaks designed panels with tabs that can snap together like a 3D puzzle. And in Block Party, the designers use red steel columns to support mass timber panels, turning that structural choice into an iconic part of their design. Now, the most common choice here was to use rectangular panels, but I did notice a few teams that tried something a bit different. One entry called The Wooden Tower used triangular connections to improve the stability of the building and essentially create timber Toblerones. Another, called First Society's Soft City Living, went with a honeycomb pattern. And Arborea 8 designed trapezoid-shaped apartments that could fit together to form a circular tower. Kind of reminded me of the corncob towers in Chicago. Other teams opted for what's known as the volumetric approach, designing pods that can be stacked on top of each other to form a building. And I noticed a couple creative takes on this idea. An entry called Solid Void alternates the placement of the pods to create voids, empty spaces that can be used to create more living space, effectively creating twice as much floor space with the same number of pods. And System Econ stacks pods onto a mega frame made of mass timber to create the tallest submission at 42 stories. Now, one advantage of the volumetric approach is that you can build more than just the structure. You can integrate utilities, appliances, and even furniture right inside each pod. The team behind 2UP designed a node, which includes a bathroom, laundry, and kitchen inside a 120 square foot pod that can be slotted into their apartments. And an entry called Fantastic Future took a more compact approach. Describing their design as aggressively affordable, they cram a bed, desk, bathroom, and dresser into a 150 square foot pod that you can rent for just $600 a month. I guess that's affordable? And while I was reviewing the submissions, I noticed that a few entries took a more hybrid approach. An entry called Culture House uses both panelized and volumetric construction. For their design, building panels are shipped to the site and then assembled into pods at a temporary factory that's right on the construction site. Volumetric modules cost more to transport than panels, but they usually go up faster. So with this approach, you theoretically get the best of both worlds. In fact, many of the winning designs combined multiple construction methods. I think the first place winner, Timber Commons, does this beautifully. It starts with a concrete core for elevators and stairs, which connects to a mass timber hallway. That hallway is connected to pods that serve as the entrance to each unit, and include bathrooms, laundry, and kitchens. Those pods are then connected to living rooms and bedrooms built with mass timber panels and columns. And the panels themselves include cassettes that create channels for ventilation and other utilities. I think this type of holistic design really takes prefab construction to another level, going beyond just thinking how these pieces fit together structurally, but how they can coordinate with each other to make the overall building function better. Now, relying on repeated parts does have a downside as well. Copying and pasting the same part over and over again can sometimes make a design look monotonous. Because of that, many teams experimented with step backs, articulated facades, and other design techniques to create something a bit more interesting than just a flat wall. Some fun examples: an entry called Float Line connects mass timber panels at angles to create a unique squiggle floor plate. And this entry called H stitches 3 rectangular buildings together with curved connection joints to create a larger squiggle building. And those joints don't just connect the buildings, they connect people too, containing amenities like libraries, gyms, and workshop spaces. I also thought this entry was really creative. Floating Village uses a stacking pattern based on the duogong technique in Asian architecture, which uses interlocking wooden blocks to support large timber buildings. Using this pattern in their design leaves tons of open spaces underneath their buildings for greenery and other community spaces. Now, I do want to say that there is a reason why mass timber buildings often look a bit blocky. You have to remember that every unique edge or wall on a mass timber building ultimately requires a different part that needs its own manufacturing process and needs to be certified. If your building's too complicated, it basically becomes an artisanal woodworking project. Because of that, one of the most common mass timber buildings to build is a rectangular block. It keeps the number of unique building parts to a minimum. Now, with enough time and investment, I think we should eventually see a much larger library of mass timber building parts becoming available, which will give people more flexibility when designing these buildings. But all that said, what was just as interesting to me were the submissions that didn't fight the simplicity of mass timber, but actually embraced it. For example, Kapla, the second place winner, leans into the boxiness of mass timber to build a 20-story tower that can be built with just 10 building parts, repeated over and over throughout the structure. With some thoughtful cladding and planters to add details to the building's facade, the end result actually looks pretty good. But like myself, the real beauty is arguably on the inside. Thanks to a single stair layout, they create room for simple but generous apartments with 2, 3, and even 4 bedrooms. In their words, this is not sculptural architecture. There are no structural gymnastics. The beauty is in the material itself and the sustainable industry it supports.
I want to. You know what to do.
Now, a big question for anyone designing with mass timber is how much of it do you actually show? I mean, wood can certainly look beautiful, but it can also be very vulnerable. When it gets wet, it can warp or rot. It doesn't block sound as well as concrete, and of course, it can burn. Well, technically, tests do show that mass timber is structurally sound in a fire because the charring on the outside protects the wood on the inside. It's honestly a whole topic for another time. Some teams played it safe, just cover up the entire structure. This entry, called Fam1, wraps the entire structure with metal cladding to keep out the elements. They even go as far as to cover the mass timber inside with drywall and sound insulation. But other teams were a bit more adventurous. One of my favorite designs was Timber Tower wearing a greenhouse coat. Their concept? Wrap a mass timber building in a glass shell that shields the wood when it's raining, but can open up on sunny days, protecting the wood structure while showing it off. What I like most about their design is that it creates a generous amount of greenhouse spaces, basically covered patios that are cozy outdoor areas in the winter and breezy open ones in the summer. Now, this discussion around exposure brings up a surprisingly tricky design challenge for mass timber buildings: balconies. Adding a balcony to a mass timber building is complicated. Unlike concrete, you can't just stick a big slab of wood out into the rain and hope for the best. Yeah, that's a recipe for wood rot. And just bolting a metal balcony to the side isn't a great solution either, because the connection points can become weak spots for moisture to sneak in and spread to the entire structure. That said, there are some ways around this. In In Timbertown, the designers proposed building steel balcony structures that are completely separate from the main frame. That's a similar approach to the Hive, where the balconies for the building are a completely different structure. And I think another interesting idea comes from our first place winner, Timber Commons. Here's their pitch. What if we got rid of balconies altogether?
No! God, please, no! No!
And create larger shared outdoor spaces on the roof and sides of the building instead. These spaces are much easier to waterproof than individual balconies, but I also think it brings up a good question about balconies in general. I mean, let's be honest, a lot of apartments today have balconies that rarely get used. They're often small, windy, and usually home to a single chair and a dying plant. So I think it's worth considering whether we actually need all these private balconies and maybe consider replacing them with larger shared outdoor spaces that people might actually use. So those were some of the key themes I noticed, but there were many other topics that were covered in the submissions as well. If you'd like to dive into them a bit more, you can check out Urbanarium's website or purchase their competition booklet, which is out right now. I'd also just love to hear your thoughts about these designs in general. You know, if there's one thing I've learned from this competition, it's that creating more and more buildings out of mass timber won't be a simple transition. This is really a new building technology, so using it will require us to rethink our buildings from the ground up, from how we plan for them to how we design them, and ultimately, how we build them.